One was caught selling herself. Another stole a king. A third was blackballed for who she loved. 17 women, dozens of scandals, and the real price of old Hollywood's dangerous desires. Elizabeth Taylor, the violet-eyed vixen with 8 husbands. She married her third husband before the ink dried on her second divorce and still had 5 more to go. Elizabeth Taylor didn't fall in love. She collided with it like a train through stained glass. Born into beauty and raised in a studio system that prized obedience, Elizabeth rebelled by loving too loudly, too often, and without apology. By 26, she'd already buried one husband, stolen another, and become the first actress paid $1 million for a single role. But it wasn't Cleopatra that made her infamous. It was what happened behind the scenes. She met Richard Burton on that set, and the world watched their affair explode in real time. Both were married. Both were magnetic. Both drank like the world owed them something. Their fights were the stuff of legend. Crystal ashtrays hurled across yachts. Public screaming matches followed by private reconciliations. No one dared interrupt. The Vatican condemned their relationship as erotic vagrancy. Paparazzi practically lived outside their bedroom. And yet, it was real, messy, epic. The kind of love that scorched everything around it. They married, divorced, married again, divorced again. But Burton was just one name in her constellation. Eddie Fisher left Debbie Reynolds, America's sweetheart, for Liz, and the public never forgave her for it. Mike Todd, her one true love by many accounts, died suddenly in a plane crash, leaving her shattered. Others came and went, pulled in by that hypnotic mix of glamour and danger. Elizabeth didn't just collect husbands. She collected heartbreak. Each marriage left a bruise the tabloids turned into a headline. She faced endless rumors, affairs with co-stars, studio execs, even a few whispered liaisons with royals. But she never hid, never apologized. When asked why she married so many times, she once said, "I only slept with men I was married to." How many women can make that claim? As the years went on, she struggled to stay healthy. The bottle became both comfort and crutch. But even in her lowest moments, Elizabeth remained a queen, scandalous, radiant, utterly human. She wasn't a victim of love. She was its fiercest architect. And when her name fades from memory, the scent of her perfume will still linger in the ruins of every love story that tried to burn as brightly. Ava Gardner, Sinatra's siren who broke royal rules. In 1953, she showed up to a Spanish palace barefoot, hungover, and still glowing from the night before. The queen refused to greet her. The king sent champagne anyway. Ava Gardner was the kind of woman who made even royalty feel insecure. Born poor in North Carolina, she had a face sculpted for sin and a laugh that could soften the hardest man. Or ruin him. She didn't chase fame. Fame chased her, but it was love, and the wreckage it left behind that carved her legend into Hollywood history. She married Mickey Rooney first, America's favorite boy next door, then bandleader Artie Shaw, who mocked her intelligence, but it was Frank Sinatra who became both her obsession and her undoing. Their relationship was a thunderstorm, violent, beautiful, impossible to ignore. They fought in public, kissed in alleyways, and drank like the world was ending. When Ava demanded a divorce, Frank reportedly swallowed a bottle of sleeping pills. He survived. She never forgave herself. They would remarry in private over and over again, emotionally, if not legally. She called him the love of my life, even when he broke her heart in 100 different ways. And still, she had lovers in between. Matadors, dukes, a bullfighter who tattooed her name across his chest. Ava didn't belong to anyone, and that's what made her so dangerous. Hollywood tried to tame her. MGM sent press agents to follow her in Europe, to clean up the messes she left behind. Broken windows, broken contracts, broken hearts, but she didn't care. She once said, "I've always had the terrible feeling that I'm nothing unless I'm in a man's arms. And so she kept returning to the fire, even when it scorched everything around her. By the 1970s, she was living in London, mostly alone, still beautiful, but hiding from the camera. Her health declined. So did the invitations. The kind of exhaustion she carried wasn't just in her bones, it was in her soul. The kind that comes from loving too hard, too often, too long. She died in 1990. Frank paid for her hospital bills, but he didn't make the funeral. Some say she was too wild to be loved. Others say she was simply too honest about needing it. Either way, she never apologized, and that's why no one ever forgot her. Marilyn Monroe, the blonde bombshell who loved too many men. She died alone in satin sheets, but once, the most powerful men in America begged just to kiss her cheek. Presidents, playwrights, producers, they all called her Marilyn, but none of them ever really knew Norma Jean. In the golden light of the 1950s, she was the dream that sold 1 million tickets. Curves poured into diamonds, whispers stitched into every hip swing. But behind the camera, chaos curled around her like smoke. Marilyn didn't just fall for men, she believed them. Joe DiMaggio, who wanted to keep her a housewife. Arthur Miller, who tried to rewrite her like one of his plays. And then the man in the Oval Office, whose name she famously sang into history. Breathy, bare-shouldered, unforgettable. But none of them stayed, and neither did she. Studio bosses murmured that she was unreliable. What they meant was that she wouldn't sleep with them twice. She showed up late, walked off set, and demanded to be taken seriously in a town that had already cast her as a fantasy. Every time she reached for dignity, someone offered her diamonds instead. She married 3 times, slept with many more. Some say her greatest love was the camera. Others say it was the audience that made her feel wanted. Her affairs weren't secrets. They were headlines, the kind that sold magazines and ruined careers. Rumors spiraled about affairs with both Kennedys, about secret tapes, about calls made in the middle of the night. The press painted her as a temptress, but the truth? She was often the one left waiting by the phone. As the years passed, the glow dimmed. She struggled with her lines, with staying awake, with staying wanted. The bottle helped, until it didn't. One director said it was like watching a candle burn from both ends. Beautiful, blinding, gone too soon. She died at 36, alone, but not forgotten. They tried to bury her as a cautionary tale. The girl who loved too recklessly, too often, too deeply. But even now, decades later, men still leave roses on her grave. And somewhere in the hush of old theaters, Marilyn still whispers through the screen, "Love me, just once more." Barbara Payton, from starlet to scandal queen. She had cheekbones like switchblades and a walk that made studio men forget their wedding rings and their careers. But Barbara Payton wasn't just dangerous to love, she was dangerous to know. In the early 1950s, she looked like the next big thing. Blonde, breathy, and bold enough to go toe-to-toe with noir legends like Gregory Peck and James Cagney. But while other actresses played bad girls on screen, Barbara lived it after the cameras stopped. She was Hollywood's open secret, passed between co-stars, producers, and anyone powerful enough to light her name on a marquee. And she didn't care who knew. Her most infamous scandal exploded like fireworks across the gossip columns. A brutal love triangle between Barbara, actor Franchot Tone, and bad boy Tom Neal. Tom caught Barbara with Franchot and beat him so badly he ended up in a coma with a smashed face and broken cheekbones. Barbara chose Tom anyway, at least for a while. Then she went back to Franchot, then back to Tom, then neither. Studios were horrified, but audiences couldn't look away. The press turned on her. Roles dried up. Her name became a punchline, not a credit. Still, Barbara kept chasing the flame. New lovers, new headlines, always walking the tightrope between notoriety and oblivion. But eventually, even scandal got bored of her. By the late 1950s, she was broke, banned from major studios, and struggling to stay sober. She battled the bottle, and the bottle usually won. She started selling herself on Sunset Boulevard, charging just enough to cover a motel room and the next night's relief. Once, a fan recognized her and asked for an autograph. She scribbled it down with a shaking hand, then asked if he had $5. She published a memoir near the end, I Am Not Ashamed, and she meant it. Barbara died in 1967 at just 39, not from heartbreak, not from scandal, but from everything they left behind. Her body gave out before her spirit did. Some actresses fade. Barbara Payton crashed. In public, in color, and in heels, no one ever really filled again. And maybe that's what haunts Hollywood most. Not that she fell, but that she refused to fall quietly. Lana Turner, the sweater girl with a knife in her purse. In 1958, police found a man's body sprawled across her living room floor, stabbed once in the chest, the handle still slick with blood. But Lana Turner, dressed in pearls and trembling mascara, insisted she hadn't even screamed. To the world, she was the perfect Hollywood pinup. Soft curls, tighter sweaters, a voice like honey poured over ice. But behind that polished image lived a woman who attracted chaos like a magnet. Lana didn't just fall in love, she made it dangerous. She married 7 times. Some husbands stayed months, others weeks. She was linked to gangsters, actors, moguls, but no affair was more infamous than her entanglement with mob enforcer Johnny Stompanato. He was violent, possessive, and didn't care who knew. The tabloids ate it up, like fights, whispered threats, jealous scenes behind studio gates. The final night was pure noir. Lana's teenage daughter, Cheryl, allegedly heard a scream behind the bedroom door, a confrontation, a knife, and suddenly, Johnny was dead. Lana testified in court, dressed in white and barely able to speak. Cheryl, just 14, took the blame. The ruling was justifiable, but Hollywood never really believed it was that simple. The scandal should have ended her career. Instead, Lana did what she always did, slipped back into character. She filmed Imitation of Life soon after, delivering a performance so emotionally raw, it mirrored her own grief. Audiences didn't just forgive her, they made her a box office queen again. But the shadows lingered. There were whispers she'd known what was coming, that the studio covered up the worst of it, that she was both victim and architect. Still, Lana kept going. More lovers, more roles, more reinventions, but the years wore on her. She battled personal demons and long periods of loneliness. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't leave bruises, just silence. And Lana Turner knew that silence intimately. She died in 1995, alone, but surrounded by trophies, the kind earned with mascara-stained cheeks and survival behind closed doors. They called her a scandal, a siren, a survivor. But in the end, Lana was something even more dangerous, a woman who refused to play the victim, even when the script begged her to. Hedy Lamarr, Beauty, Brains, and Bedroom Secrets. In 1941, while men stared at her on the silver screen, she was sketching blueprints for a torpedo system between takes. Hedy Lamarr didn't just seduce Hollywood, she outsmarted it. With cheekbones that could launch wars and an accent that made censors nervous, Hedy arrived from Austria as a mystery. Her debut in Ecstasy, the first widely released film to feature a nude scene, gave her instant notoriety. But it was her mind, not her body, that made her dangerous. She co-invented a frequency-hopping technology meant to stop Nazi interference. Years later, it would become the backbone of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. But Hollywood didn't want a genius. It wanted a goddess. And Hedy knew how to play the part, both on screen and off. Her love life read like a European novel. 6 marriages, countless lovers, and whispers of affairs with the powerful and the political. She married a Nazi arms dealer before fleeing him. Later, she was linked to Howard Hughes, who gifted her a set of miniature airplane wings to wear around her neck. a symbol of both obsession and control. She once described herself as a good housekeeper. Every time I leave a man, I keep the house. The line was funny, but the truth was quieter, more aching. Behind the diamonds and dramatic entrances was a woman who felt used by studios that marketed her body, by husbands who silenced her brilliance, and by an industry that only remembered the scandal, never the science. As she aged, the roles dried up. So did the marriages. She allegedly turned to shoplifting, not for need, but for the thrill, a quiet rebellion against being forgotten. She struggled in her later years, both financially and emotionally. The public remembered the bombshell, not the blueprint, the face, not the fire behind it. She passed away in 2000, her ashes scattered over the Vienna woods, the same city she once fled for freedom. Hedy Lamarr was never just one thing, not to Hollywood, not to history. She was beauty personified and a brain no one saw coming. And in a town built on illusion, perhaps her greatest scandal was being real. Jean Harlow, the platinum temptress. Hollywood feared they dyed her hair so white it nearly burned her scalp, and then built an empire off the ashes. Jean Harlow wasn't just the original blonde bombshell. She was the warning label hidden inside the fantasy. She burst onto screens in the early 1930s like lightning in silk, with arched eyebrows, bedroom eyes, and a laugh that hinted at secrets. Jean became the blueprint for every seductress that followed. Men lined up to direct her, date her, marry her, but no one ever truly held her. Her first husband died mysteriously just 2 months after their wedding. A self-inflicted act the press covered with suspicion and studio spin. Rumors swirled. A volatile relationship, threats exchanged behind locked doors, a final note left behind. Jean never spoke publicly about it. She simply put on another dress, powdered her face, and went back to work. Then came her second marriage, to MGM's fixer, Paul Byrne. He was twice her age and allegedly struggling with his own demons. 2 months in, he was found dead at their home with a note the studio scrubbed from the press. MGM covered it all with military precision. Jean, draped in black, went to set 2 days later. Her grief? Marketed. Her pain? Reshot in better lighting. Behind the scenes, she dated mobsters, millionaires, and married men. Her relationship with William Powell was real, tender, complicated, often overshadowed by the ghosts of her past. She wanted to marry him. He kept delaying. Some say he was afraid she'd die on him too, and in the end, she did. At just 26, Jean Harlow collapsed on set, her body giving out after weeks of illness. The studio blamed exhaustion. Those closest to her knew it was more. Years of overwork, emotional stress, and ignored symptoms. Powell paid for her crypt. Clark Gable carried her casket. Jean was gone before most people realized she was more than a punchline in peroxide. Beneath the platinum hair and scandalous headlines was a woman who kept showing up, even when her heart was breaking and her body was screaming for rest. She didn't live long enough to be forgotten, but she lived fast enough to be mythologized. And somewhere, in every bottle blonde that ever stole a scene, Jean Harlow is still whispering through the lens, "Be careful, darling. I've done this before." Mae West, the woman who wrote her own lovers. In 1930, Mae West walked into jail wearing silk stockings, a fur coat, and a grin that made the warden blush. She left 8 days later, more famous, more feared, and completely unrepentant. Before the studio system could tame its women, Mae had already broken the leash. She didn't just play seductresses, she wrote them. At a time when women were expected to be seen and not heard, Mae West was writing, producing, and starring in plays that had men lining up for tickets and lawmakers lining up to shut her down. She was arrested for indecency. After her play, sex drew massive crowds and even bigger headlines, but the cuffs never fit. Mae used the scandal like a press release. Theaters sold out, studios came calling, and she made sure that if they wanted her, they had to play by her rules. She strutted into Paramount at nearly 40, an age most actresses were being pushed aside, and made herself a star. With razor-sharp one-liners and hips that seemed to swing to their own rhythm, Mae didn't just flirt with the camera. She devoured it. Her films were packed with innuendo, double takes, and characters who melted in her presence, and behind the screen, just as bold. Mae was linked to boxers, musicians, producers. Rumor had it she kept a rotating stable of companions decades younger than her, some of whom lived in her guest house, others in her bed. She never married officially, though one quiet union early in her career did exist, something she rarely acknowledged. When asked why, she quipped, "Marriage is a fine institution, but I'm not ready for an institution." Mae didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't fade. She kept her body strong, her mind sharper, and her image completely under her control. But as the industry grew more sanitized under the Hays Code, Mae's scripts were censored, trimmed, and eventually shelved. Hollywood grew afraid of what she represented, a woman who didn't ask for permission, and certainly never begged for forgiveness. She outlived most of her critics and died in her 80s, still flirtatious, still unforgettable. Mae West didn't just seduce the world, she outwitted it. And in the end, it wasn't the men she bedded that made her legendary, it was the ones who tried to stop her and failed. Tallulah Bankhead, the Southern belle who slept with everyone. In 1932, she lit a cigarette at the Algonquin and said, "My dear, I'm as pure as the driven slush." The laughter echoed, but the warning was real. Tallulah Bankhead was the kind of woman you never introduced to your husband or your wife. Born into Southern aristocracy, she brought the slow drawl of Alabama and the chaos of a hurricane to every soundstage, dinner party, and hotel suite she entered. Her name was a promise, scandal, wit, and a night you'd never quite recover from. She was more than a film star. She was a theater force, a socialite, and a magnet for drama. Her affairs were not whispered secrets. They were shouted from balconies. Directors, writers, politicians, actresses, chauffeurs. Tallulah didn't discriminate. If she wanted you, she made it known, sometimes with just a raised eyebrow and a 4-word invitation. She famously claimed she'd slept with more people than the phone book. Some said it was a joke. Others said it was just math. Studios tried to market her as a temptress, but she wouldn't play along. She showed up late, underdressed, and wildly overprepared. Her performances crackled with electricity, but behind the brilliance was a woman battling personal demons, loneliness, exhaustion, and a growing reliance on substances that dulled the noise but sharpened the spiral. By the late 1940s, the offers slowed. Her unpredictable behavior and refusal to censor herself made producers nervous. She once arrived on set without a script, claiming she didn't need one. "I wrote it better in my head anyway." Her health suffered. So did her finances. But Tallulah refused pity. She leaned harder into the persona, swanning through hotel lobbies in turbans, whispering scandalous one-liners, and toasting the ghosts of lovers past. She died in 1968, still talking, still laughing, still impossible to contain. Tallulah Bankhead lived like a live wire, beautiful, dangerous, and always just a little too bright for the room. In a world that punished women for wanting too much, she wanted everything, and had the audacity to enjoy it. She wasn't built for quiet endings. She was built for fireworks, and long after the curtain fell, you could still smell the smoke. Zsa Zsa Gabor, the Queen of Diamonds and Divorces. In 1989, when asked how many husbands she'd had, Zsa Zsa Gabor purred, "You mean mine or other women's?" From the moment she arrived in Hollywood with her accent like champagne and a fur coat for every mood swing, Zsa Zsa wasn't chasing stardom. She was redefining it. She didn't need the lead role. She was the spectacle. Her name alone conjured perfume, pearls, and a dozen ex-husbands dodging alimony payments. Zsa Zsa married 9 times, more if you count the rumors. There was the hotel magnate, the oil tycoon, the actor, the diplomat, the plastic surgeon, and finally, a German prince who gave her the title Princess. She wore with more pride than any Oscar. She collected men the way others collected handbags, frequently, lavishly, and without guilt. But her marriages weren't quiet. There were brawls, lawsuits, public insults, even a now legendary moment when she slapped a Beverly Hills cop during a traffic stop and ended up in jail, wearing diamonds. Yet behind the glamour was a woman who understood exactly how the game was played. She knew Hollywood rewarded obedience in women, so she leaned into excess instead. She turned every affair into a headline, every scandal into a performance. When one lover reportedly left her without warning, she responded by arriving at a gala the next night, dripping in emeralds and smiling like she just won the lottery. But the spotlight grew dimmer with time. Her roles slowed. So did the invitations. The tabloids that once adored her began to mock. She faced serious health struggles in her later years, enduring multiple surgeries and long hospital stays. But Zsa Zsa kept her public face on. Lashes curled, lips painted, voice always ready with a perfectly timed insult or innuendo. She passed away in 2016 at the age of 99, leaving behind not just a complicated estate, but a legacy built on diamonds, defiance, and delightfully unapologetic desire. Zsa Zsa Gabor didn't pretend to be innocent. She didn't want to be. And in a town that demands women stay quiet, loyal, and grateful, she raised her glass and her eyebrow and said, "Darling, I am a marvelous housekeeper. Every time I leave a man, I keep the house." Joan Crawford, the Ice Queen with fire behind closed doors. In 1935, she stood on the staircase of her Brentwood mansion and told her lover to leave, then threw his suitcase into the rose bushes below. He climbed down. She didn't watch. Joan Crawford was the embodiment of control. Sculpted brows, crisp shoulders, and a stare that could freeze champagne. But behind the meticulously polished image was a woman fueled by fear, ambition, and an unrelenting hunger for love, even if she had to fight for it with claws out. She rose from poverty, from scrubbing floors and dancing in speakeasies, to become MGM royalty. But Joan didn't rely on luck. She seduced, outworked, and outlasted. Her list of lovers read like a studio roll call. Actors, executives, producers, even directors who swore they'd never mix business with pleasure. She made sure they did. Her most infamous marriage was to actor Franchot Tone, a man she loved fiercely and lost just as fiercely. He wanted art house roles. She wanted Oscars. Their marriage dissolved in a fog of jealousy, affairs, and emotional warfare. When he left, Joan allegedly lit a cigarette and said, "Now I can finally get back to work," and work she did, obsessively. She was said to bathe in ice to tighten her skin, label her hangers by day of the week, and fire house staff for speaking out of turn. But that wasn't vanity, that was survival. In a system designed to discard women over 30, Joan made herself untouchable. Yet the rumors followed, whispers of flings with women, of rivalries turned physical, of nights spent drinking alone, waiting for calls that never came. Studios tolerated it, until they didn't. By the 1950s, the roles grew fewer, the face grew harder, the hunger sharper. She was battling the bottle now, and the silence between phone rings started lasting weeks. When she took the role of a decaying former actress in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, it wasn't just a performance, it was a mirror. She died in 1977 with her makeup drawer still organized and her legacy still under debate. Joan Crawford wasn't warm, she wasn't sweet, but she was unforgettable. A woman who fought for every kiss, every role, every breath of relevance. And though many feared her, the truth is, most simply couldn't look away. Gloria Grahame, the bad girl of film noir. In 1951, she won an Oscar with a performance that lasted less than 10 minutes, but it was what happened off-screen that kept Hollywood whispering for decades. Gloria Grahame was the kind of woman noir films were built for. Smoky voice, wounded stare, and a mouth that always looked like it was about to lie or confess something you weren't ready to hear. On screen, she played femme fatales who ruined men with a glance. Off-screen, the damage was just as seductive and twice as real. She married 4 times, but her second husband was the one who sealed her legend in Scandal. Director Nicholas Ray caught her in bed with his teenage son, her own stepson. The boy was just 13 when they met. Years later, Gloria would marry him. The story splashed across tabloids like acid, ruining her reputation and freezing her career in place. Studios, once enchanted by her dangerous beauty, suddenly went cold. Scripts stopped arriving. Friends stopped calling. She retreated to the stage and to Europe, where the scandal felt less loud. But the damage lingered. Gloria never stopped chasing love or chaos. She battled personal demons, a volatile temper, and a deep-rooted insecurity that directors whispered about behind her back. One said she was too fragile to touch, too dangerous to ignore. Another claimed she refused to be filmed from the left side of her face, fearing it wasn't pretty enough, even as audiences found it unforgettable. In her later years, she faced illness quietly. She performed on stage even as her body weakened, ignoring doctors and defying pity. She collapsed mid-performance in London, insisting on finishing the show before seeking help. She didn't return to the stage again. Gloria Grahame died in 1981. No long goodbye, no final redemption arc. Just a woman who loved too recklessly, lived too fiercely, and left a trail of cigarette smoke and broken hearts behind her. She wasn't made for safety or comfort. Gloria was made for shadows, the kind that cling to memory long after the film ends. And in a town that punished women for misbehaving, she made misbehavior look like art. Dolores del Río, Mexico's most desired export. In 1934, a studio executive whispered, "She walks like she already knows all your secrets." And Dolores del Río never bothered to correct him. She arrived in Hollywood, draped in mystery, eyes like oil, voice like silk, and a presence so potent it made censors sweat. At a time when Latinas were offered roles as maids or mistresses, Dolores played queens, goddesses, and women men died for. And sometimes they nearly did. Her affairs were the kind legends are built on. Orson Welles, Errol Flynn, Cedric Gibbons. The artist Diego Rivera once called her a moving painting. But it wasn't just her beauty that captivated, it was her control. Dolores didn't chase men. She chose them, quietly, decisively. Her most infamous romance was with Orson Welles, who was nearly 20 years her junior. Hollywood buzzed with scandal. A young genius in love with a woman too seasoned, too foreign, too unapologetically powerful. Their love was real, but not built to last. He cheated, she left, with dignity intact. Behind the scenes, Dolores kept a secret apartment in Los Angeles, a place without cameras, press, or protocol. There, she entertained lovers without consequence and conducted her life on her terms. Studio men called her difficult. What they meant was unbothered. As the 1940s rolled on and roles began shifting to younger, blonder starlets, Dolores made a bold move. She left, returned to Mexico, reinvented herself. While other actresses faded into nostalgia, Dolores became a pillar of Mexico's golden age cinema, delivering performances deeper, darker, and more rooted in soul than any costume drama Hollywood had offered her. But the price of being unforgettable is that people never stop trying to possess you. Rumors followed her until the end. Secret affairs, forbidden liaisons, even whispered connections to foreign royalty. She never confirmed. She never denied. She died in 1983, wrapped in legend and lace, not a fallen star, but a sovereign one. Dolores del Río didn't just survive Hollywood. She outgrew it. And in an era that tried to typecast women like her as temptresses or trophies, she proved you could be both and still walk away untouched. Linda Darnell, Desire in a Silk Gown. In 1951, she lit a cigarette in her nightgown and stared at the television as one of her old movies played. Hours later, the room was in flames, and so was she. Linda Darnell was once called too beautiful to be real, her skin like porcelain, her voice like velvet, and eyes that seemed to ask for trouble even before she opened her mouth. Hollywood didn't discover her, it sculpted her, turning a shy teenager from Texas into a woman audiences desired but rarely understood. She became a star, fast, too fast. By 16, she was under contract. By 20, she was playing the seductress. The other woman, the temptress, the beauty men ruined their lives for. It didn't take long before that role followed her home. Her first major affair was with director Joseph Mankiewicz. Married, older, brilliant. Their relationship was passionate, doomed, and widely whispered about on studio lots. When it ended, she unraveled quietly, not with rage, but with that particular kind of ache, the kind that settles into your bones and makes even the smallest rituals feel like too much. She married 3 times, each one ending in heartbreak. And between the marriages were lovers, some in the industry, some not, but all drawn to the same thing. A woman too radiant to resist, too wounded to truly reach. As the 1950s rolled in, so did the rejection. Roles slowed. The spotlight dimmed. Studios said she'd aged out, even as she was barely 40. She turned to the bottle, not with scandalous defiance, but with the soft, slow surrender of someone trying to mute the noise in her own head. On the night of her death, she was staying at her former secretary's house. They watched one of her old films together, Stardust. Linda had once called it her favorite. She fell asleep with the cigarette still burning. She suffered third-degree burns over most of her body and died a day later. She was only 41. Linda Darnell was always the woman in the gown, flawless, tragic, adored. But behind the beauty was someone still waiting to be chosen for more than her face. And in the end, it was her own image, playing in the background, that witnessed her final moment. Susan Hayward, the flame that couldn't be contained. In 1949, she walked off set in full costume, slammed the dressing room door, and made the producer wait 2 hours just to prove she could. That wasn't a tantrum. That was Susan Hayward, taking back control. With fiery red hair and a temper to match, Susan didn't ask for attention. She demanded it. She built her career playing women who clawed their way out of tragedy, heartbreak, and betrayal. And off-screen, she was living that same script, only with more cigarettes and fewer retakes. Her love life was as turbulent as the roles she played. Her first marriage to actor Jess Barker crumbled under the weight of rumors, resentment, and legal chaos. The custody battle for their twin sons made headlines, and so did Susan's next string of lovers. Leading men, producers, a few too many with rings on their fingers. She didn't care, and she didn't apologize. On set, she was famously intense. She memorized everyone's lines. She argued with directors. She fought for better roles, higher pay, and the kind of respect rarely offered to women who looked like her. Studios called her difficult, but what they meant was unmanageable. The pressure weighed on her, and so did the loneliness. She battled alleged depression and long, isolated stretches between films. Insiders whispered that she'd begun drinking more, not in public, but in private, where the curtain never truly closed. Still, she kept climbing. In 1958, she won the Oscar for I Want to Live, playing a death row inmate with such raw emotion. Audiences wept in their seats, but even that triumph came with shadows. Friends said she identified too deeply with the role. The shame, the fight, the fear of being discarded. In her later years, Susan pulled back from the spotlight. Married again? Quietly. Fought illness even more quietly. The flame dimmed, but it never flickered out. She died in 1975, buried in Georgia, far from the sound stages and scandals that once defined her. Susan Hayward burned bright, often too hot for the room. But she never pretended to be sweet, or safe, or small. She was a star, forged in fire, and she made sure you felt it, even when the scene was over. Clara Bow, the it girl who couldn't escape the spotlight. In 1927, Clara Bow was the most desired woman in America. Yet behind the smoldering glances and bobbed red curls was a young woman fraying at the seams. She wasn't just Hollywood's first it girl, she was the very definition of it. Until it devoured her whole. Born into poverty and raised in chaos, Clara carried her scars into stardom. But it wasn't the silence of the silent era that kept her quiet. It was survival. By the time she hit her stride, starring in It and Wings, she had the entire nation under her spell. Studio heads cashed in on her sex appeal, while turning a blind eye to the rumors that clung to her like smoke. The most explosive moment came not on screen, but in scandal sheets. A former assistant, scorned and bitter, leaked a private diary full of alleged escapades, risque details, and moments of raw vulnerability. Whether truth or fabrication, the tabloids didn't care. They feasted on every word, painting Clara as wild, unstable, and promiscuous. The public turned. Directors hesitated. Studios distanced themselves. Clara never stood a chance. She retreated into her estate, battling personal demons and the kind of emotional exhaustion that doesn't just make you tired, it empties you. Her relationships unraveled. She was accused of erratic behavior and was quietly nudged out of the spotlight. And in the final twist of irony, the very it that made her a star was now treated like a liability. Her later years were spent in relative obscurity, far from the limelight she once commanded. The woman who once lit up the silver screen now wandered in the shadows of her own legend. But her story isn't just one of scandal. It's a haunting lesson in how fame, especially when built on desire, can chew through a soul. Clara Bow gave everything. Her body, her voice, her spark, and Hollywood repaid her with silence. In the end, she didn't lose her shine. The world simply stopped looking. Linda Christian, the original Bond girl with a scandal list. In 1945, she walked into a Hollywood party and left with Tyrone Power's attention, even though he'd arrived with someone else. That was Linda Christian's specialty, disrupting the plot without ever raising her voice. Born in Mexico, fluent in multiple languages, and blessed with a face that seemed lit from within, Linda wasn't just beautiful. She was deliberate. Her eyes softened when needed. Her smile lingered just a second too long, and men followed her out of rooms as if hypnotized. She married Tyrone Power 2 years later, in what was dubbed the wedding of the decade. Fans adored them, the golden couple, full of glamour and promise. But behind closed doors, it was anything but picture perfect. Tyrone was rumored to still carry torches for past lovers, and Linda, tired of playing the patient wife, began building a list of her own. She was linked to princes, actors, diplomats. One scandal claimed she was caught slipping out of a royal suite just minutes before the press arrived. Another whispered that her affairs weren't always about romance, but leverage. After her marriage to Power dissolved, she didn't retreat. She doubled down. She starred as the very first Bond girl in a 1954 television adaptation of Casino Royale, years before the iconic film franchise began. And though the role didn't catapult her to superstardom, it cemented her as a symbol. Beautiful, dangerous, unforgettable. But time was not kind. The roles stopped coming. The headlines slowed. She made a few appearances in foreign films, but the Hollywood doors had quietly closed. Her reputation, too complicated, too independent, too unruly, preceded her. Still, she lived richly, traveled, hosted parties where the guest list was more interesting than the menu. She knew how to vanish from the spotlight without ever truly disappearing from memory. Linda Christian died in 2011 at the age of 87. No major tributes, no retrospectives, Just a quiet end to a woman whose life was anything but. She was never the damsel, never the victim. She played her own game, in her own language, and made sure the rules bent for her. And in a town full of performers, Linda didn't act, she maneuvered. Jean Kent, the silent seductress who knew too much. In 1953, she vanished from a film festival dinner in Venice. 2 hours later, she returned with a wrinkled dress, untouched lipstick, and a smirk that shut down 3 rumors before they could finish forming. No one dared ask. Jean Kent didn't explain herself, and that was her power. With porcelain skin and eyes that flickered between innocence and danger, Jean Kent didn't need scandal to feel intriguing, but she always seemed to find it anyway. A British export, with the heart of a provocateur, she played vamps, villains, and women with secrets in her eyes. Off-screen, not much different. Jean's lovers spanned continents. Actors, royals, tycoons, whispered names scribbled into hotel registries and scratched off again by morning. Studios called her too clever, which in their language meant unpredictable. She kept a mental log of names, dates, and weaknesses, and she never forgot a single one. One producer said, "You couldn't lie to Jean, not because she'd catch you, but because she already knew the truth." She carried herself like someone who had read the final chapter before the first page was written. Despite her allure, she never broke through in Hollywood the way she should have, partly because she refused to play their game. She turned down roles she found boring, lovers she found arrogant, and contracts that came with too many rules. That kind of control scared men and threatened the system. As her career slowed, Jean didn't flinch. She drifted back to British cinema and the stage, refusing the slow death of fading glamour. She lived alone, quietly, never married again after her one husband died. No dramatic downfalls, no tabloid meltdowns, just long walks, sharp memories, and a few quiet interviews where she hinted but never revealed the stories she carried. She passed away in 2013 at the age of 92, having outlived nearly every man who once tried to direct her. Jean Kent never played the ingenue. She played the enigma and lived as one. In a world addicted to exposure, she chose privacy as rebellion. And perhaps that's the greatest scandal of all. A woman who knew everything and said almost nothing. They were called scandalous, dangerous, even ruined. But the truth is, they lived louder than the men who tried to silence them. These weren't just actresses. They were fire in a world that demanded smoke. If their stories moved you, don't let them fade. Like, comment, and subscribe, not just for more stories like these, but to keep their names burning where they belong, in the light.